For those who are new to a Worldview Café conversation, we have them every month. We build up to them in our writing and blogs as we journey towards the Café conversations. They're free, and we try as far as possible to have a conversation. We do share some of our thinking with you, but that's more to trigger the conversation than anything else. Today's topic is how do support functions connect meaningfully with the operating core of the business? To some extent, that came out of work that we've been doing in fairly large bureaucracies, and this feeling of disconnection that we've been hearing about. And then we had some provocative kind of questions. How do professional identities create silos? Why do the different functions often miss each other's kind of value adds or value? And what 2 or 3 practical steps can we work up that help us bridge these divides? Of course, that takes us, firmly into good organizational development practice, but it also takes us somewhere close to organizational design. So we can play with what are the structural elements that might create silos, and we can play with org design approaches and interventions that might bring them down. We promised to start with HR and then use that as a kind of an example, but maybe consider other support functions, like IT or legal or whatever it might be, and ask how might they also connect to the core. In order to do that, we're going to have to think about what do we mean by the core and what do we mean by support services. So we'll play with that just a little. I see Matlaga's agreeing with that because it's not always clear what is core, what is support. Of course, if you're an HR outsourcing business, then providing HR services outside is kind of core. So it feels like that's not a support, but then internally you've got your own HR function. So we'll see where that goes. But in the usual worldview form, we want to start with a conversation in the groups. So I am going to share a screen, and for those of you who are used to worldview call, you know that I'm going to share the question with you now. Beatrice, can you see my screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay, so let's sort of build up and say silos. We'll have to look at what do we mean by silos first, because silos form part of the whole build up to why would you have a silo, either the support function's a silo or the operating core is a silo, and we can't bridge these divides. So we know that in order to have an effective organization, we must divide up the work, and we divide that work up into departments and sometimes into divisions. And that creates these vertical chunks that become known as silos. And of course, this only happens beyond a certain size. So the moment we're having a conversation about how do we get a support function to connect to the line, why would there be silos on one side or the other? By implication, we're talking about an organization that's big enough to have formed these different units. And that means we're not talking about the small startup, personal enterprise kind of space. Again, for those of you who've been working with us for a while, on the org design side, you know that we've got a bit of a bromance with Henry Mintzberg's thinking. And Henry Mintzberg has a particular view on organograms and org charts and structures of organizations. And I'm going to use that to try and make sense of what do we mean by support staff. So we'll unpack that in a second. But to get us warmed up, let's open with this in the breakout rooms. So while I'm setting up the breakout rooms, just take a look at the question that I want you to ask each other is, why do silos actually bother you? So what we don't want to talk about is silos as if we all know what we mean. Unfortunately, silo can be a suitcase word, and it can hide a multitude of issues when we label something as a silo. So good practice, I think, is to dig underneath the skin of that kind of presenting problem and say, well, why is this silo bothering you? What a good discussion might be is, well, you know, unit A or unit such and such is behaving in this way, and that's causing this kind of problem. And what I'm very interested to hear is, based on the stories of the people in the call when you come back from these discussions, what is it about silos that made you think, let me show up on the call, let's attend now. Deroncho.
Hi, Craig. How are you?
I was so delighted to see you on the registration list. I'm so excited to hear your voice.
Yeah, I'm very excited to be back in the community of practice.
Yeah, this is a treat, eh? You look like it's really cold wherever you are.
The aircon is very, very strong for me. I
Okay.
can't.
You can't.
Oh, but
All right,
some of
welcome
my
back.
colleagues are also here. Just quickly, some of my colleagues are here. Samuel and Corinne, say hi.
Hello.
So nice, eh? I hope you all had a good chat in the groups, and I do want to get debriefed. Sometimes we don't debrief this first round, but this particular topic is so broad that I want to try and deal with what you're dealing with rather than what's in my head. So, and in any order, could somebody just shout out and say, what did you notice in your room? And want to pay particular attention to granular stories. You know, what are these disconnections? What are you hearing, seeing, experiencing? Just tell us some of the stories that you heard. I want to be respectful of the fact that some of the stories might be reasonably confidential, so you don't have to use names, but I'm sure you can find a way to tell the story without, you know, and for those of you who are new to the Worldview community of practice, we do try to be professional about confidentiality. So when people do share, we're grateful. Communities of practice work with real stories. So we'll appreciate that by not really talking about them afterwards. Somebody want to kick us off?
I think I will for our team before everybody takes the thoughts. But I think what stood out for me was how Anita explained what a silo is. And she literally explained the silo is where you store the grain and the only connection is the top. And that for me, it was just interesting because the metaphor itself and then bringing it home to in a work environment where everything is done at the top and the people at the bottom don't get to understand. That breaks when communication is not filtered through correctly. That creates conflict, and she shared. So I think for me, that metaphor being broken down that way was just something insightful. You are on mute, Craig.
Thank you. And have you experienced that in any way? Is there any kind of story of that disconnect that's maybe on your mind or recent that you can share?
I didn't share it in the group, but yeah, if it's like that, in an environment like that, it becomes toxic because leaders often, managers or senior managers, never agree on everything. And with those disagreements, it infiltrates down to the teams at the bottom, therefore resulting in you not being able to work with each other. And I think the isolation she mentioned, the conflict there's no transparency, there's fear, there's no collaboration, there's infighting because of these silos. So I think, yeah, that's what I've experienced as well.
Thank you, Mataga. Anybody else from that group want to add any stories or kick us on to another group?
I think it's good to go to another group.
Go on then. Who's up?
I'll share briefly from our group. In group 1, we spoke about how this existence of silos is as present and prevalent in educational institutions as it is in commercial entities. Thinking about the variety of projects that the people in my group worked in, and the different roles that we occupy, and how what seems like a fitting and appropriate cluster creation of functions can sometimes create artificial barriers where people almost have greater allegiance to the function they belong to than seeing and serving the bigger picture. We spoke about how a number of leaders are back with buzzwords today being things like collaboration, it's teamwork, it's innovation. How for those things to happen, that interdisciplinary, interfunction collaboration is necessary. So we do find that a fair amount of clients are challenged by how to break through, how to work better together. And a question that Beatrice spoke of is how when coaching some of her clients, a key question she asks is, whose responsibility is it to integrate the one into the other? Is it the function of core to invite support and other functions? Is there like a rule or principle that applies to that? Or is it the one who sees the need, who then needs to initiate that shift? And I'll stop there.
Sindiswa, thank you. And you know that invites me to tell a real case story in education. So a very large education institution, lots of regional branches, and in the specific story, you've got an HR unit sitting in the Eastern Cape, supporting a small kind of satellite operation of the main university. They complain bitterly about their feeling of isolation and their feeling of disconnection. And from their point of view, the core educational operation is the silo. What they come to realize is that they themselves are the silo. And they come to it through one story. The Department of, I think it's something to do with marine biology, wants to open a branch, an arm, a teaching center in the Eastern Cape. The HR unit has been setting up governance barriers to that for over 2 years. So really just creating conditions under which it's not possible for the marine biology unit to start to teach in the Eastern Cape. They suddenly realize that they're not supporting, they're blocking. The solution is relatively simple. The heads of the senior players in the HR unit, I mean, it's a massive HR unit in a satellite, reach out to the academics on the marine biology side, set up a call, go into a discussion with just one question: how can we help you shift now? And it starts to flow, it starts to move. It's like the perception of the silo was just the wrong way around. And that was a support unit totally disconnected from the core. They believed that their job was to govern the HR. They didn't understand that their job was to support the core in its project. Thanks for reminding me of the story, Sindiswa. What other discussions from any of the other groups?
In our group, we had Model and Ronso were with me. And interesting in that I come from a really small company. Model comes from management training, and Ronso is in a mammoth. So I said to her, what I find very helpful is that we are small companies, so it's easy to identify. Like with us, I find people are territorial in their own teams. They want to do things their way because this works for their part of the process. But every single department is part of a long process, and they all want the same end result, but they lose the plot because processes are written. We have one client, so it's policed quite heavily. But then they forget, they just want to follow the process to the T, and then forget that there is some collaboration that's required. So often I'll encourage the managers to have regular meetings about what's gone wrong in the week. And then instead of having the teams sorted out amongst themselves because they become so caught up in themselves, it's not a positive interaction. Better for the managers to take note of what challenges have been experienced in the week. And then they talk to each other to see where the two procedures can meet. So from Sindiswa's, no, not Sindiswa, I think it was Matlacha, I'm not sure if I'm saying your name correctly, but your explanation of the silo that, just the people at the top are speaking to each other and it's not filtering down. I think we're trying to prevent that from happening by having those regular meetings. But yet the solution I am describing won't work for Toronto because she's in a mammoth. So how does that apply where you don't even see, at least I can quickly see what's happening and try to address it in that way. But then, what does Toronto do? I said, I'm not sure whether it's possible for them to try to get down to, because sometimes people are doing the work. They're the ones who know what the challenges are. Managers are managing, they're doing what they're supposed to do, but they don't know the actual steps that go into getting there. And then sometimes it boils down to some practical element that will fix it. But you need to get people talking.
Well, you've beautifully demonstrated the first point, which is the emergence of different units in an organization is completely natural, even in a small organization. It doesn't, the moment you're more than one person, I normally say it's at about 3 people that we start to separate. You look after the drinks, you look after the food, and I'll play the music. And suddenly we've got roles, and everybody's then got their way of doing things, and off we go. But in a small organization, we can put people around a table quickly and resolve it. So there's something that shifts in the move to medium and large that we need to think about a solution. You've given us a clue. There's something going on with the managers, but we'll come to that in the talk. Thank you. Anybody else? One more, even if so it's time for one more group or one more voice to give us a real example of what are you seeing? What is it about this relationship between support and core that might play out into a story we can work with? If you had something to say, what would it be?
Great, maybe I
Oh,
can
okay.
jump in.
Go for it.
I'm from that same coal-juicing mammoth as Toronto. And yeah, we and Dumisani and I had a quick chat and own experience. We sit, we're part of a support, supporting a support team, supporting the core, and due to space constraints, we actually sit with that intermediate support group. And just the difference in being in the same space makes a huge difference, because the rest of the core group sit on a separate floor in head office, and there's much more interaction with this, let's call it a program team. And I was just, when Dumisani was talking about the culture of the organization, simple things like that plays out into the culture. And I was wondering, is there, where does the real relationship need to be? Is it within the function, or is it within integrating that, the delivery of the core? And that's a huge thing that we grapple, and that's where so many of us are on the call today, because we're grappling with that at the moment, but there's at least the realization at the executive level that collaboration needs to start playing out better. I'm going to stop there.
Thank you, Samuel. Beatrice, I'll give you an opportunity because you did come in. Do you want to build or shift on that?
It's a bit of a shift, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
In our group, Sandiswa said something so interesting. Just before we left the room, she said, silos become people's homes, which goes to identity. And while we were coming back to main room, it started me thinking about how that implies perhaps a sense of comfort. This is where I build my identity. This is my sense of comfort. And so that's where I choose to feel comfortable. And reaching out across silos is maybe not that comfortable. What I wanted to say. Thanks.
Yeah. And a lovely use of words. And it does, at least to my mind, it connects to what Samuel was saying. The starting point always on thinking about silos or integration, the starting point has to be that the formation of those in-groups is natural. So the moment you start out by saying it's unnatural, why are these people clumping together and why are those people clumping together? You've missed something vital in this whole conversation. It's normal. And not only is it kind of natural as a human thing, we reinforce it heavily with, for example, professional training. So, we can start there. If you're trained as an HR professional, you have a certain set of standards and rules and processes and norms that are the way of being HR. And if you're attending SABPP continuing professional development points, you're currently caught up in the need to impose HR governance on the organization. And you'll see, I'm going to take this example even further. You're caught up in the HR way. And before you think I'm having a go at HR, the same is true for the IT, the information technology group. They are educated and trained in a certain way. They've built up a certain set of skills and knowledge and abilities that rely on a certain language and a certain way of doing things, and are evolving into IT governance standards that they impose on the organization. And if you think it's just about the IT, we know that the accounting and finance teams are, of course, there. There are global standards that have to be followed, and they impose that on the organization. And so it is natural, as we separate the work, that separate identities then start to form. And for those of you who are comfortable in working in diversity, then you go, it's okay. You know, you're allowed to be you, I'm allowed to be me. But the question is, how do we connect? And here we've got two different splits that I'll be talking about again in the talk. Two different ways of thinking about this is, one is the structural guys like Galbraith and McKinsey's 7S framework and those org design guys. They think they can create, you know, for them, they design linking roles, linking mechanisms into these units. So we'll talk a little bit about what does a linking role look like between a support unit for a support unit that's dealing with a core. Structurally, you create coordination roles, you put specific, sometimes you put managers in charge of both teams. At some point, you know, those two teams report into one manager, but you create structural mechanisms to try and shift the behavior that links. Then there's the behaviorists. And Mintzberg is strongly on the behavioral side. He's much more interested in looking at the natural forces at play. So he wants to look at the dynamics of the HR unit relative to their core. And that you can't say all core units are the same, because they're not. If your core unit is a bunch of programmers in an IT kind of systems business, that's different to core units in a bank. Core units in a bank are different to core units in a hospital. So Mintzberg wants to just slow down and say, I want to smell and taste the patterns at work in these relationships, and then figure out how you work with those energies to link them. Not discounting the structural solutions, but at least starting in a different place with a different mindset. Okay, we've got some stories in our heads. I'm going to share some stuff with you that may or may not, you know, it might just make it worse, but at the very least, you'll just have to listen to my voice for a while. While I'm sharing, it's not quite as easy for me to see you guys. So if you're trying to get my attention, please shout. Okay, Sindiswa, you'll have to be my proxy. Is my screen sharing? Thanks. All right, so this is the broad thing that I'm going to try and talk through. I'm going to talk about Mintzberg's organization, and some of you hopefully have seen this. If you've been working with WorldView for the last year or two, this won't be the first time you've seen it, but I know that some of you might be seeing it for the first time. Then we'll talk about forces, the forces of separation and the forces of unity that might be in play. And I'm going to use a bank as a case study because it's a proxy for this discussion. And then I might get to a theory of change if there's time. And then I want to come back to you, and you go back into breakout groups to try and dig into some more of those specific stories, and we come back if there's time and unpack that too. So let's look firstly at Mintzberg's weird drawing of an organogram, because Mintzberg keeps saying every time you draw an org chart, you're not actually drawing the organization. You're just drawing a bunch of boxes and lines. But he separates, and this is important, the operating core. So when we say your support relationship with the core, he's got the core kind of at the bottom, huh? That's where we're facing the client and we're delivering some sort of value to a client in exchange for something. Gary's got the middle line, these managers that are sitting in the middle, and then what he calls the strategic apex. And I think Matlaga's story of the explanation of the silos that she got from Anita is this feeling that if this was one silo and then there was another silo, they're only connecting at the top. Well, today's discussion is to focus on the relationship between the support staff, and Mintzberg puts the support staff off on one side here. And we were curious about the relationship between the support staff and the operating core. But importantly, Mintzberg puts another bubble on the other side. and he calls it the technostructure. And they too are supposed to have some relationship for supporting the operating core. And what I'm going to try and do is illustrate two things. The first is that much of HR is no longer in support, it's in the technostructure. And then we'll talk about the implications of that. So let's go. And for those of you that are interested, you can access pretty much everything I'm talking about around Mintzberg online or through your AI. So this is a redrawing of Mintzberg's picture, and let's think about a traditional bank. The operating core would be the people who deliver the bank's primary service. And in all of your businesses, you can think through who's your operating core. What is it that they're delivering? In the bank's case, it's financial intermediation. The support staff are units that provide indirect services to the organization, but do not contribute directly to core production. And at face value, what we would expect is the support staff is kind of tuned into the needs of the operating core. The story I tell myself is this: in a small business, and we've at least got one, maybe more people from small businesses on the call. At some point, one or two people start a company, they're doing everything themselves, payroll, HR, accounting, selling to clients, marketing, the whole caboodle, and they grow. And eventually, the core work gets too much for them and they start to get other people to do stuff. In those businesses that I've experienced, the support staff are highly tuned into the CEO. They are, so tuned in that you get stories of the support staff saying, he's arrived wearing black today, watch out. They've got line of sight of the mood and the whims and the needs of the core. And the core is usually, maybe 5, maybe 10, maybe 15 people. And they're very responsive. The technostructure, on the other hand, only emerges later. You don't get a technostructure from day one. You don't even get it in a small, maybe medium. The technostructure is analysts, and they design the work. They standardize the work, and they monitor the work of others. It is these kind of technocrats that are sitting inside a bureaucracy. Now, you have to start to ask yourself, if you're in the support services, do your support functions look more like support tuned into the needs of the core, or more like technostructure? And let's continue with the bank example and dig into that a little more. Here we break out in a bank what these examples look like. So in the center of your screen is the operating core. And in a bank, that would be things like branch operations, customer service centers, commercial or relationship management, investment banking, credit and loan offices, even the digital channels that are emerging, those operations of the digital channels would sit in core. So if you're with Nedbank, more and more, now if you go to a branch at Nedbank, which is branch operations, branch staff, their job is not to ask you what you need. Their job is to teach you how to use the app to solve what you need. So they're shifting that drive into digital operations. And then, of course, all operations processing. Now, what is that? Mintzberg's language is that is highly divisionalized. So each of those becomes a silo. Those divisions are silos. It is digitizing. So they're taking those core operations and they're digitizing them as fast as they can, and automating them as fast as they can. They want to take cost out of that operating core and, in theory, add convenience to their customers. It is a programmed machine. So when we think about the forces, the nature of that core, in a bank, it's very rules-driven, it's very compliance-driven, it has to be. They're dealing with other people's money and they're doing it at scale. It's a machine bureaucracy. And And if you try and resist that in the core operations of something like a bank, or possibly, even at a large, company that moves coal into other chemicals, if you resist that, it's dangerous. Things go wrong. You lose people's money or you blow things up. So very rule-based in the center. The support services over on the right-hand side of your screen. In an organization like a bank, those support services are big. They have these large shared service operations that are now trying to shrink and drift to self-service. They're trying to push self-service back to their internal customer, because the genuine support staff are focused on the core, and they're trying to digitize themselves and push that back. And so you see in the bank new systems for managers to manage employee relations issues. Instead of phoning HR to help you with employee relations, now you log into a system, and the system is supposed to guide you as a manager through employee relations. Who's there? It's legal services, corporate affairs, facilities and security management, learning and development. In theory, L&D from the HR side, or internal training academies, stay quite responsive and close to the core. Procurement, executive support, secretariat, marketing, branding, they stay fairly close to the core. That's more like the professional assembly. Each of those have got their own professions and their own standards. Those L&D professionals are trained in a range of things, and maybe there's some project work going on that side. So innovative project kind of work. And then we get this very powerful, very dominant on the left-hand side, the techno structure. And in an organization like a bank, or a very large, hospital group, or a very large industrial concern, this techno structure is where a lot of silo mentality arises. Here you've got risk management, compliance and regulatory affairs, finance and management accounting, the data science, analytics and modeling. So in a bank, those are the guys who are determining, what we're going to charge for stuff, what, which customers you can and can't take on. Those are all created as rules. IT architecture and systems design. And then importantly, in yellow for this conversation today, most of HR. In these kinds of settings, in a bank or a large industrial concern, they are setting HR policy, HR reward systems, job frameworks, the grading systems, all of that is coming across as rules and process, and then internal audit and quality assurance. So yes, it is a professional assembly. There's lots of different professions represented in the techno structure, all of whom have trained very hard to get to where they are, and are continuing down the road of an identity that says I'm an HR professional. And when I say that, I mean I subscribe to all of the HR standards. I'm a medical professional in a hospital, and I subscribe to all the medical ethics and medical rules. And I'm a compliance and a risk professional, and I've got all these rules and processes about compliance. And so those professionals become the engineers or the mechanics and the rule makers that are designing and maintaining the operating core, which is a kind of an interesting picture that starts to emerge of where does the power actually sit, and what does that relationship look like between the left and the center and the right and the center? What is at play and what should be at play? What does ideal look like? So we come back to Mintzberg. We're zooming, we zoomed out a little, now we zoom back in. There's the support staff. In theory, responsive to and adapting to the needs of the core. And often they do, if they're genuine support staff. But then you've got the techno structure imposing itself on the core. And I think one of the delegates on the call then asked the question, what is this? How do you resolve that in the large organization? And that is the responsibility of the middle line. That's the work of middle management. And I want to emphasize management, because we're going to get into discussions around management versus leadership. And those of you, again, who've been following Worldview for a while, know that we have a couple of simple positions on this. Excellent management includes one of 10 things that excellent managers have to do is excellent leadership. There are 9 other things that excellent managers have to do. And that foundation is critical. If excellent managers are not doing the 9 other things, leadership alone is not enough. And so what does that look like? I've dramatically simplified Mintzberg's take on this and said that middle line's job is to translate, and let's start with that. It's translating from the strategic apex. So in that picture of the silos, those very, very senior connections, it's the middle managers that are translating that down and across the large organization. And they translate that into operational goals and metrics and plans. Why does that matter? Goals, words like goals, metrics, and plans. Well, again, some people on the call talked about this kind of feeling of discouragement and feeling of disconnection at the lower levels of the organization. In the constructs like psychological capital, so you ask yourself, how do we make sure that people in the operating core have the energy, the psychological energy to take on another challenge? And a great proxy for that is psychological capital. For those of you who've been playing with psychological capital, you know that it's made up of 4 different constructs, the first of which is hope. And hope is not just a vague feeling, that the world will be better. That's optimism. In this psychological construct, hope is made up of, number 1, I need to see the goal. If I can see what the goal is, as opposed to, I don't know what the hell we're trying to do here. So just that simple difference. I don't know what the hell we're trying to do here versus I can see what we're trying to do here. Well, that is the translation of operational goals and metrics and plans into language that other people might understand. So taking it from the top and down. So it's the first requirement for hope is I can understand, I can see this goal. And the second is to have a plan or a pathway to get there. And that plan or pathway to get there comes from coordination across the functions, products, or geographies to maintain alignment. So it's that coordination of the rules coming from the technostructure, the help from the support staff, the desires and wishes of the strategic apex, and the operating reality of the core. Coordinate across all of that and then enable performance through good supervision. And by good supervision, I include everything that we mean by transformational leadership. So individual consideration, paying attention to where people are at, inviting collaboration and conversation, and then reporting and feedback both ways to keep people aligned and keep people moving. So what we see is this critical role of the middle line. Who's the middle line? In a bank, the middle is quite extended because in theory, the middle would include this lower middle tier, maybe branch managers. I'm not sure that team leaders, many banks call their first line supervisors team leaders, and that might not quite be the middle, but certainly branch managers. But their work in the very large bureaucracy, they're just executing standard procedure. It's quite difficult for them to play too much of a linking role other than at their own level. And at the top of the middle in a bank, you've got that executive tier, which is divisional, the divisional heads, so retail banking CEO, corporate banking CEO. They're trying to translate the overall strategy into their divisional strategies, so heavy strategic translation role. In between, you've got this senior middle tier. And in any of your organizations, you'll know what that looks like, that senior middle tier. In banks, it's regional heads, area managers, maybe product heads. And I'll put a little bit more kind of words here to say, what do they need to be doing? Yes, manage profit centers, allocate resources, and so on. But here on the Munzberg function, you see social capital as their coordination currency. People like Dr. Louise van Rijn, who's on the call, keep reminding us that it is in the quality of the relationship that we resolve many of these issues. The generation of that social capital is critical. In the face of the technostructure, and unfortunately in the face of what many of you represent, many of you represent the imposition of rules and standards. And, you can't do that, Mr. Senior Middle Manager, because of this labor law, or this policy, or this procedure, or this, standard that we've set. And so they're incredibly constrained in terms of what they can and can't do. But the best of them are incredibly enabling in that they coordinate and link and deal and bridge and make a plan and pull people together to do this mutual adjustment, which is a skill that we have in project teams inside a machine bureaucracy, as they try and bridge that apex to the operating core. So you can hopefully get a sense already that I'm suggesting that in a bureaucracy where silos are emerging, it is the quality of the work we do with those middle managers. What are we doing in the middle to resolve and link and open up? Because the moment you try and say to the technostructure, stop it with all your rules and processes, you're putting yourself at risk, big risk. You've lost respect for what that technostructure is trying to do. But at the same time, if the technostructure tries to impose too much on the core, you put yourself at risk. You start to jeopardize client relationships or other operating processes. So it's these middle managers that either become silos or face the technostructure silo. Well, I want you to go and open up your discussions back in your groups, and then come back and we'll see what sense you've made of any of that. So in your stories about silos, what character does the middle line play? I am going to give you a moment just to write down that question so that you don't forget it. In your stories about silos, what character does the middle line play in the story? Are they the cure or the cause? Hero or villain, agent or victim, glue or repellent, toxic, or what is the language? And what does your middle management development program do with this? How do you work to bridge those connections? So hopefully you're ready to talk now. You've heard me too much. We're getting you back. We're under some time pressure today. It's unusual. It feels like our 90 minutes has really flown by. But those of you who have stuck around for the full 90, I appreciate you. Thank you. We had our usual little drop off at 10 o'clock for those who thought it was an hour, but the rest of you are here. Okay, as quick as you can, what's come up in room 1?
Sorry, who's room 1? I
Oh,
don't know
heck.
where we are.
I don't know. So whoever wants to speak first, speak for your room.
Okay, so I'll happily go and I'll try and keep it brief. Our storytelling really focused on victim, role of victim as opposed to agent. And Sandiswa linked that to a sense of learned helplessness or displaying a learned helplessness kind of set of behaviors. And Corinne said that she saw that coming through quite a lot as well. And Corinne said there's a lot of reinforcements that needs to come from the top. However, people hide, the middle line hides behind, this is coming down from the top. And there's no real ownership or agency happening at that level in terms of that. That is her experience. And then in terms of my experience, and I took it back to some of the stuff that I'm seeing in one of the tertiary education institutions' leadership development programs, is when they get assessed on emotional intelligence, there's a competency called influencing stakeholders. And I don't think they're spending enough time on that at all in their MDP levels or in their higher up types of programs as well. Because when I explore it in my coaching with people, people battle to describe to me what is the process for influencing stakeholders around them in terms of that, and how do they influence in a positive way. So our core thinking in our group was that they need to move to agent, but they're stuck in victim.
So powerful, Beth, just so powerful. Your group, I mean, I'm curious about this because I really don't want to say that I'm definite about it, but in the clients I've been working with, and then I say to these middle managers, have you been on flawless consulting, and you've learned to contract? Yes. Are you able to have that contracting conversation with that executive or with that technostructure rep? No. And then there's a story. There's a reason. Can you have the courageous conversation? No. But you were trained on it. Yes. It's not, they're not switching on that agentic role. Next group, maybe the next group's got a different story. What did you guys come up with? Don't keep us hanging. If your group's not
Sorry, I'll
volunteering, just
talk.
start speaking. Thank you. You're up.
So
Please,
in our
go for
group, we explored the core, basically leaning on culture, depending on the culture of the organization, and also what is rewarded, right? So I'm glad you made that we go on specific courses and then we come into an organization and we're unable to actually implement it. Because in that layer, if I'm not rewarded for those courageous conversations, then I'm going to keep my mouth shut and toe the line. So yeah, we focused on the combination of what's the culture of our organization and what behaviors are rewarded in that very core, not the core roles, but that management, that middle management role. If we see in our organization that the silo behavior, the behavior that that's not so healthy is rewarded, then we don't really use those roles to properly translate and make things better. I hope I captured it, group.
The middle managers then become some kind of, they look a lot more like a process control pipeline, just funneling straight down, but transforming nothing, just funneling, and compliance in the sense that they're a pipe, they're not a process.
Yes.
And there's something wrong there. I speculate on what that break is. I think we have, over the last 20 years, we've made management a swear word. We've deliberately tried to collapse management layers, circumvent. In fact, most of our executive and strategic attention is how to delayer, how to bypass, how to let the technostructure. I mean, I talk to some banking clients, their change processes ignore flat out the middle and junior managers. They treat the managers the same way they treat the affected staff. There's no preliminary preparation of prepare the people managers before we engage the staff. Nothing. the people managers are part of the staff, disempowered, disconnected, disengaged. And then you wonder why they're not playing this critical role. The critical function of the middle is to translate, manage, coordinate. But the more you treat them like something to be delayed and disconnected and digitized, here's Louise. One of my clients called the middle management permafrost. Yeah, so there's something wrong there, and I suspect it's an unintentional consequence of the way we're thinking about management in general. Last group, you have the final word. Whoever can and will speak from the third group that hasn't yet spoken, please speak now. And then Louise, I'm going to ask you to give some reflections on what we've heard, if you're up for that. So, spokesperson for the last group who hasn't yet been heard. Oh, the silence is, I'm just hearing crickets. Who's in the group that hasn't been heard yet? Will you at least put your hand up?
Well,
Yeah, no, it's us, but I'm waiting for my slager.
And she's waiting for you.
I was looking.
So Craig, I just quoted one of something that you wrote in an article, which I'm quoting across the organization at the moment, saying that middle managers are that traffic official at the 9-lane intersection. And that's what they're experiencing, and they, in many instances, just say go away, so that repellent. And I think that's a challenge. And yeah, the leadership development programs not necessarily dealing with those things. It's basic planning, organized, leading, and controlling, but really dealing with complexity in the workplace, not as much.
Thank you, Samuel. Thank you. There's something wrong. I still haven't got to the point of solution, but there's something wrong in the way we're thinking about and preparing and developing and supporting the middle in these mid-size and large bureaucratic institutions that are what they are. You know, we keep trying to wish that they would be something else, and so we create solutions to try and make them something else, instead of solutions that help you to be what it is, to play with the forces that are at play rather than pretend. Louise, I don't know if you're still with us or if
No, I don't know. I've switched my video off. Can you hear me now?
Hear you clearly, and inviting you to reflect for a minute or two.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. The challenge that I think we've all spoken to this issue is that firstly, we are not clear in our contracting and onboarding with middle managers about what's the expectation. But I don't think that expectation is shared either. So people in any of these organizations we talk about have different expectations about middle managers. Some want to get rid of them, some understand them as part of the problems or solutions, some see them as part of the problem. So there is a real opportunity for us to rethink the story that we are telling ourselves about the role and contribution and possible contribution, because at the moment it does feel as if collectively we have discredited the middle management layer rather than see them as a critical enabler of strategy enablement. You know, their role is absolutely critical to enable our strategy to be implemented. And so then it comes back to what is the expectation, because part of the expectation surely is around stakeholder engagement and influencing and working across boundaries and engaging other people. And so in our organizations, we often talk about, are we playing rugby or tennis? It feels to me as if many middle managers at the moment are playing tennis. They're worried about my goal, my objectives, how am I being remunerated, rather than realizing that the only way that we're going to achieve the organizational goals is if we play rugby. And that means stronger together and working together. And so I can go on forever about this. Thank you, Craig. I found this incredibly valuable in terms of provoking us to think more about this.
And for those of you who are following Louise, you know, she's heading off shortly to Thinkers 50. And then she's got 2 debrief sessions, one on the 18th and one on the 19th of November. So under the Symphonia brand, you want to maybe try and dial in for one of those. I want to wrap it up, not because we're out of things to talk about, but because we're out of time. So what we can conclude is that there are many forces in the red arrows that pull us apart. The forces of clashing organizational forms. So the form of the core versus the form of the enterprise architects and the form of the HR unit and the form of, they're all unique. We've got clashing professional or even industry norms. We've got managerial personality clashes. We've got issue mismatch. You know, one party thinks this issue is critical, the other party thinks the issue is not critical. Functionalization, unit purposes and processes, why we exist, divisional purposes and processes and markets and products and geos, all of that kind of stuff pulls us apart. What brings us together is recognizing that something is worth it. You know, we share high levels of care for some common concern. Professional alliances, divisional deals, cross-functional teams, and then this critical role. You know, Louise was saying, what is it about those middle managers? Mintzberg just talks about linking and dealing. Linking, and I love that analogy. It's more like playing rugby than it is about playing tennis. So the middle line are a powerful part of the solution or a critical part of the problem. My 3 pieces of advice that I promised are, firstly, go out and see for yourself. So you've got to get face to face with the real problem at the real place and the real people. Genshi Genbutsu. Get out there and observe and observe both sides. It's critical. I've worked with HR units. You cannot tell me what the line manager's reaction to their latest proposal is because they simply don't know. Facilitate community. Work with managers from both sides of the issue. So if you're in an OD or HR if you're in a helping space trying to solve this problem, do what one of the speakers said earlier, is just get them together around a table, but at management level. Those middle managers, get them together and get them talking. And then, you know, take a book from the classic OD stuff, which is heal relationships to solve issues. Do not try to solve the silo. The silo has its place. It is important. There's a reason that unit or that team exists. Don't try and fix the silo, fix the relationships. Thanks everybody for participating. We're together again next month. Wilgie does strategy facilitation, organization design, change capability, leadership, and teams. Hit like and share, whatever those things are you're supposed to do on social media. Really appreciate you all for joining. Thank you and goodbye.